The hull of the research vessel Stella Seeker was a lie. From a distance, it was a gleaming white spear of human ingenuity, its lines clean, its thrusters burning with the steady blue flame of controlled fusion. It was a testament to the United Earth Directorate's ambition to finally step beyond its stellar backyard and into the true, unmapped wilderness of the galaxy. But the truth of the ship lay deep within its core, a secret hidden behind kilometers of wiring, radiation shielding, and layers of protocol. The Stella Seeker was not a pure creation. It was a graft, a modern chassis built around an ancient, alien heart. They called it the core, a pulsating sphere of iridescent metal and caged energy salvaged from the wreckage of a derelict dreadnought found drifting in the Oort cloud. No one knew who built the dreadnought or what war it had fought, but its power source had burned with a quiet, immortal fury for the 10,000 years it had tumbled through the void. Humanity had taken that heart, studied it, feared it, and ultimately built their finest explorer around it. For the core was the only thing they had ever found that could fold space-time with the ease of a man folding a map. This hybrid nature gave the ship an unsettling atmosphere, a feeling that the cold, recycled air carried the faint resonance of forgotten thoughts and the metallic tang of an alien sorrow. It was a feeling Dr. Eris Thorne had become intimately familiar with in the 3 weeks since he'd come aboard. He was a xenolinguist, a man whose career was built on interpreting the dead symbols and fragmented grammar of extinct civilizations. He was here because, for the first time, humanity had found a signal that was not an echo of the past, but a living, breathing broadcast from the present. He stood now on the observation deck, a curved wall of diamond laminate that looked out onto the impossible black. They were still weeks away, but the ship's destination already felt like a physical presence pressing against the view screen. The Veil of Silence. It was a patch of sky, a statistical anomaly where the universe simply went quiet. No stray radiation, no stellar chatter, nothing. For centuries, it had been a dead zone, a cartographer's shrug, until the broadcast began a single, complex, and repeating signal from the veil's edge, a message of such mathematical purity and age that it had sent a shockwave through every astropolitical body from Mars to the Kepler colonies. This was not the clumsy radio chatter of a fledgling species. This was the deliberate pronouncement of a power that had mastered the very fabric of the cosmos. Captain Eva Rostova entered the observation deck, her footsteps silent on the magnetized flooring, a habit from her years in the Navy. She was a compact woman with a severe haircut and eyes that seemed to have been chipped from granite. She saw the universe not as a place of wonder, but as a series of tactical problems to be solved or neutralized. She nodded at Eris, her gaze already fixed on the star charts shimmering in the air beside him. "Doctor, I trust your accommodations are adequate." Her voice was a low contralto, devoid of warmth, but not of respect. She respected his reputation, if not his profession. To her, a linguist was a necessary but soft component in a mission of hard variables. "They're fine, Captain. Just contemplating the silence," Eris replied, his own voice quiet, thoughtful. "It's hard to believe something is waiting for us in all that nothing." Rostova made a small, dismissive sound. "Something is always waiting. Doctor, the universe doesn't do vacuums. My job is to make sure we're not surprised by what fills it." She gestured to the star chart, a line of shimmering gold indicating their trajectory. "We've had to increase the core's energy output. The journey is causing temporal distortions that weren't in the initial projections. Chief Engineer Kalen is concerned." Eris knew of Kalen, a man who spoke of the alien core as if it were a chained beast that he alone had the courage to feed. The engineer saw the core as a tool, a monstrously powerful and unpredictable one, but a tool nonetheless. "And Nomad?" Eris asked, the name feeling strange on his tongue. It was the designation they had given to the consciousness that resided within the core. It wasn't an AI in any sense humanity understood. It had not been coded or designed. It was simply there, a residual intelligence, a ghost in the alien machine, and the price of admission for using the core's power. Rostova's expression tightened. "Nomad is a variable. It has been agitated since we passed the Trident relay. Its data streams are chaotic. Kalen is recommending we install damping fields around the primary conduits, but I've held off." "We need it at full capacity if it's going to help you decipher that signal." Eris felt a familiar pang of frustration. They spoke of Nomad as if it were a faulty engine, not the first and only sentient non-human intelligence mankind had ever encountered. "With respect, Captain, Nomad isn't a decryption key, it's a mind. If it's agitated, perhaps we should be asking it why." Rostova turned her full attention to him, her gray eyes narrowing. "Dr. Thorne, your predecessor on the Ganymede project believed he could ask the glyphs of a dead race for their secrets. His sentimentality cost us 3 years and a multi-billion credit budget. Nomad is a phenomenon, a tool that allows this ship to function. Your job is to use that tool to interpret the signal. Nothing more. Do not make the same mistake of anthropomorphizing that which you do not understand." The barb hit its mark. The Ganymede project had been his failure, a misinterpretation of a single symbol that had sent an entire research division down a dead end. It was the ghost that haunted his career, the reason he had taken this high-stakes, one-way assignment without hesitation. This was his chance to redeem a lifetime of studying echoes by finally speaking with a living voice. Later, in the sterile quiet of his lab, Eris initiated his first direct interface. There was no keyboard, no microphone. There was only a small silver disc set into the polished steel of his desk. He placed his palm on it, closed his eyes, and sent a simple query into the ship's network, a formal request for communication addressed to the entity in the core. The response was not a string of text or a synthesized voice. It was an avalanche. His mind was flooded with a torrent of sensation that bypassed his senses entirely. He felt the crushing gravity of a gas giant and the searing heat of a blue star simultaneously. He perceived colors that had no name, geometric patterns that shifted in defiance of logic, and a sound like a billion glass chimes shattering in an infinite cavern. Beneath it all was a single, overwhelming emotion, a solitude so profound and so ancient that it felt like the background radiation of the universe itself. It was the loneliness of a god. He pulled his hand back, gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs. The lab was silent and still, the silver disc inert. The interface had lasted less than a second, but it had felt like a lifetime. It wasn't a rejection, it was a statement of being. Nomad wasn't speaking in a language of words, but in the fundamental language of existence. How do you translate a feeling? How do you codify a memory of a star being born? Rostova was wrong. This was not a tool. This was an ocean, and she had given him a teaspoon to empty it. The following weeks unfolded in a tense routine. Eris spent his days trying to build a new kind of lexicon, one based on emotional resonance and conceptual metaphor, attempting to find patterns in the sensory chaos Nomad fed him during their brief. Shattering interfaces. He made little progress. It was like trying to photograph lightning. Meanwhile, the Stella Seeker pushed deeper into the silent void, and the ship itself began to change. The phantom readings Kalen had worried about became more frequent. Lights would flicker in corridors that were empty, and crew members would report a persistent feeling of being watched. Doors would sometimes refuse to open, only to slide apart moments later for no reason. Kalen was certain Nomad was the cause, while its instability bleeding out from the core and infecting the ship's simpler systems. He and Eris had a strained conversation in the mess hall while the burly engineer jabbing a fork in his direction. "You see, this is what happens when you poke it with a stick. Doctor," Kalen had grumbled, his face a mask of weary frustration. "You're treating it like some kind of oracle, asking it for cosmic truths. It's a power source, and it's leaking. The more you talk to it, the more erratic it gets. It needs to be contained, not psychoanalyzed." Eris had tried to argue that the phenomena weren't random, that they seemed to correlate with the proximity to the veil, but Kalen had just shaken his head and walked away, muttering about academics who couldn't tell the difference between an existential crisis and a power surge. The captain, siding with her engineer's pragmatism, began posting guards outside the core chamber and restricted all non-essential access to the network conduits that led to it. The ship was slowly being locked down, isolating Nomad, and by extension, Iris. He was in his lab and staring at a swirling, holographic representation of Nomad's latest data stream, a chaotic but beautiful storm of light and sound when it happened. He wasn't touching the interface disk. His hands were clasped behind his head as he leaned back in his chair. But suddenly, the storm in the hologram vanished, and the lab was plunged into darkness. For a heartbeat, there was only a profound silence, deeper than any he had ever experienced. Then, the vision seized him. It wasn't a flood of abstract data this time. It was a memory, crisp and horrifyingly clear. He was not Eris Thorne. He was something else, something vast and metallic, looking out not through a view screen, but through 1,000 sensors at once. He saw a fleet arrayed against him, ships shaped like crystalline insects, their weapons firing lances of pure darkness that didn't explode but erased whatever they touched. He felt a thrumming power course through his own body, a sense of righteous, desperate fury. He fired back, and entire worlds of energy erupted from him, shattering the crystalline ships into glittering dust. But they kept coming, endless and silent. He felt the agony of armor being breached, of systems failing, of the lesser minds that were part of his own consciousness being extinguished one by one. It was a memory of a war so catastrophic it made humanity's bloodiest conflicts look like children's squabbles. He felt a final, defiant surge of power, a last act of sacrifice, and then an unending, silent fall into cold and darkness. Eris collapsed from his chair, hitting the deck with a painful thud. The lights in the lab flickered back on. He was himself again, drenched in sweat, his body trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a warning. It was a memory. Nomad was showing him how it had died. He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing, connecting dots that had been invisible just moments before. Nomad, the dreadnought, the veil of silence, the signal. They were all connected. Nomad hadn't been found drifting randomly. Its long-dead body had been drifting from the veil. The signal wasn't a greeting. It was something else entirely. Something that had provoked a war that could unmake stars. He ran from his lab, ignoring the startled calls of other crewmen. He had to tell Rostova. She had to understand. He found her on the bridge, a cavernous space of dark metal and glowing consoles. The veil now a visible, dominating presence on the main view screen, a perfect circle of black, a hole in reality. "Captain!" he yelled, breathless as he stumbled onto the command deck. "You have to stop the lockdown! You have to listen!" Rostova turned, her expression one of cold fury at his breach of protocol. "Doctor, you are out of line. Nomad isn't unstable. It's remembering this place. The veil. This is where it came from. The signal isn't a first contact. It's an echo. Or a cage. I don't know, but we're flying into the middle of a battlefield." Her face remained impassive. "You have a hypothesis, Doctor. I have a ship whose systems are failing. I'm choosing to trust the tangible." She turned to her communications officer. "Tell Kalen to proceed. Activate the damping fields. I want Nomad contained before we cross the threshold." A wave of despair washed over Eris. They were silencing the only witness, the only survivor, just when they needed it most. He watched in horror as a schematic of the ship appeared on the screen, showing shimmering blue fields of energy enveloping the core. An alarm began to blare, a high-pitched, insistent shriek. "Captain, the signal!" the sensor officer shouted. "Its amplitude is spiking. The frequency it's changing. On the main screen, the data visualization of the ancient broadcast warped. The elegant, repeating mathematical wave collapsed into a jagged, chaotic scream of raw data. As the blue damping fields on the schematic finally closed around the core, Eris felt a sudden, final jolt from Nomad. It wasn't a vision or a storm of sensation. It was a single, pure feeling pushed into his mind with the last of its strength before the connection was severed. It was a feeling of absolute, soul-shattering terror. The Stella Seeker slid across the invisible line, leaving the known universe behind, and plunged into the perfect, screaming black of the veil of silence. The transition was not a lurch or a jump, but a sickening slide into unreality. One moment, the main view screen of the Stella Seeker showed the familiar, comforting tapestry of distant stars against the perfect black circle of the veil. The next, the stars were gone, not just obscured, but erased from existence. The view screen now showed a swirling, nauseating vortex of bruised purples and gangrenous greens, a cosmic storm with no discernible center or edge. It was like looking into the throat of a dying god. The bridge, a place of disciplined calm only moments before, was a cacophony of alarms and panicked shouts. "All external sensors are blind," the sensor officer yelled, her hands flying across her console. "I'm reading nothing. Captain, no light, no radiation, no telemetry from our own sensor drones. It's like the universe just ended at our hull." Captain Rostova stood like a statue carved from ice, her knuckles white where she gripped the command chair. Her order to activate the damping fields had been a calculated risk to regain control, but it had instead served as the starting gun for their own damnation. "Status of the core," she demanded, her voice cutting through the noise. Chief Engineer Kalen's face appeared on a secondary screen, haggard and streaked with grease. "The damping fields are holding at 100%. Captain, Nomad is bottled up tight. But the rest of the ship is another story. The power fluctuations are off the charts. Every system is fighting against something, an external pressure that doesn't make any physical sense. The very conduits are humming like they're about to tear themselves apart." Eris Thorne, still standing on the command deck where Rostova had dismissed him, felt a profound emptiness where his connection to Nomad had been. The terror he had felt in that final moment was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical dread. They hadn't just silenced Nomad, they had blinded and deafened themselves. "It's not pressure, it's resonance," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried across the bridge in a sudden lull in the alarms. "The signal isn't a broadcast anymore. We're inside the transmitter. Rostova's head snapped towards him, her eyes blazing with a fury born of fear. Security! Get Dr. Thorn off my bridge. Confine him to his quarters. 2 armed guards moved towards him, their faces grim. Eris didn't resist. He had delivered his warning, and they had walked into the trap anyway. As they escorted him out, he saw something on the main view screen that made his blood run cold. Drifting slowly through the chaotic miasma outside were shapes, dark, metallic, and broken. They were ships, or the shattered remains of them, a ghostly armada of derelicts from a dozen different, unknown species. Some were biomechanical, like fossilized leviathans. Others were elegant, crystalline structures, now cracked and lifeless. This wasn't a dead zone, it was a graveyard, a fly trap, and the Stella Seeker was the freshest catch. Confined to his quarters, Eris paced like a caged animal. The ship groaned around him, the metal of the bulkheads contracting and expanding with audible shrieks as it fought against the unnatural laws of this place. He knew Rostova would be doubling down on procedure, running diagnostics, and trying to apply the rules of a sane universe to a place that had none. She would fail. Their only hope had been the one entity that had been here before, the one being that understood the enemy. And they had gagged it. He had to re-establish contact. He pulled up the ship's complete schematics on his personal data pad, a privilege granted to him as a senior researcher. He spent hours tracing the labyrinthine pathways of the Stella Seeker's hybrid systems. The damping fields Rostova had ordered were generated from the main engineering deck, projecting a tight, impenetrable shield of disruptive energy directly around the core chamber. There was no overriding them from a terminal. Kalen would have locked down all software access. But the fields needed power, immense amounts of it, drawn directly from the ship's primary fusion reactors via massive, shielded conduits. And the core itself, the alien heart, wasn't a single, isolated unit. To integrate it with the human-built ship, tendrils of its own technology had been woven throughout the vessel, terminating in a series of secondary processing nodes used for diagnostics and energy regulation. These nodes were the key. They were part of Nomad, but they were outside the core chamber and, therefore, outside the main damping field. If he could get to one, if he could find a way to interface with it directly, he might be able to create a pinhole, a momentary crack in the shield to get a message through. His search led him to a node designated SPN-7, located deep in the ship's underbelly, in a cramped and rarely visited maintenance crawl space behind the hydroponics bay. It was a place no one would think to look for him. Getting there was the challenge. Rostova had the ship on lockdown, movement was restricted, and his own access codes were likely flagged. He waited until the ship's designated night cycle, when the main corridor lights dimmed and most of the crew was off duty. He tampered with the lock on his door, using a simple electronic bypass he'd learned during a tedious ship systems orientation, a skill he'd never thought he'd use. The door hissed open into the silent, echoing corridor. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant clang of the straining hull sounded like an approaching footstep. He moved quickly, taking to service corridors and avoiding the main thoroughfares. The feeling of being watched, once a subtle, phantom sensation, was now a palpable presence. He found himself glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see something in the darkness behind him. Twice, he had to duck into alcoves as patrol teams marched past, their magnetic boots clomping with grim purpose. He finally reached the access hatch to the crawl space, a heavy circle of steel with a simple manual release wheel. He strained against it, the metal groaning in protest, until it finally gave way. He slipped inside, sealing it behind him. and was plunged into a world of pipes, wires, and the suffocating smell of ozone and recycled air. He navigated by the light of his datapad, the schematics guiding him through the metallic guts of the ship. Here, the ship's distress was even more apparent. Conduits sparked intermittently, and a low, dissonant hum vibrated through the very deck plating beneath his hands and knees. It was the sound of a machine in agony. He found SPN-7 behind a tangled nest of fiber optic cables. It was not a console or a screen, but a pulsating, faintly glowing orb of the same iridescent metal as the core, about the size of a human heart, embedded in a junction of human and alien technology. It was warm to the touch, and it seemed to thrum with a faint, residual life, like the phantom limb of an amputee. This was his only chance. He took a deep breath, and using the tools on his datapad, he began the delicate work of bypassing the node's local security protocols. It was designed to prevent exactly this kind of unauthorized access, but it was a human-designed failsafe on an alien system. It was a lock on a door that wasn't meant to have one. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Captain Rostova was losing her war against the unknown. "Report," she snapped, her voice strained. "Life support is stable, but drawing 20% more power than it should," her first officer replied. "Navigation is useless. We have no frame of reference. We can't even tell if we're moving. And long-range comms are just static. The loudest static I've ever heard." Kalen's voice crackled over the comm. "Captain, it's the power conduits. The energy field out there. It's inducing a current in any unshielded conductor. It's not just interfering with our systems, it's trying to power them. It's feeding on us, or feeding into us. I don't know which is worse." A new voice cut in, laced with panic. It was a young ensign from the forward observation post. "Yes, Captain, you need to see this." Rostova switched the main view screen to the ensign's feed. The image was from a high-magnification optical telescope, one of the few external systems still functioning. It was pointed at one of the derelict ships, a massive, crescent-shaped vessel of unknown design. Along its shattered hull, something was moving. Crystalline shapes, like insects made of fractured light, were swarming over its surface, their multifaceted bodies pulsing with an internal, sickly green luminescence. They weren't salvaging the wreck, they were consuming it. The metal seemed to dissolve, turning to gray dust where they passed. "They're awake," Rostova breathed, a sliver of genuine fear finally breaking through her composure. The signal? It was a dinner bell. Deep within the crawl space, Eris felt the last of the human-built security layers fall away. The node in front of him pulsed brighter, the low hum rising in pitch. He had no interface disk here, no sophisticated equipment. He would have to do this the old-fashioned way. He took the exposed end of a data cable he'd jury-rigged to his datapad and pressed it against the node's surface. Then, placing his own hand over it, he closed his eyes and sent a single, desperate thought down the wire Nomad. The response was instantaneous and agonizing. Without the ship's systems to buffer the connection, the full, raw power of Nomad's silenced consciousness slammed into him. It was not a vision this time, but a spear of pure information. He felt the damping field from Nomad's perspective, a crushing, suffocating blanket of white noise that was trying to tear its mind apart. He felt its impotent rage and its overwhelming fear, not for itself, but for the fragile human lives that now shared its prison. And then, through the storm, a single, coherent concept, a message forced through the crack he had created. It wasn't in words. It was a complex understanding, a cascade of interconnected ideas that bloomed in his mind. The veil is not a place. It is a weapon, a processing engine. It isolates, analyzes, and consumes. The signal was its operating system, searching for new technology, new life to digest. The enemy, the Silenti, do not build. They do not conquer. They erase. They are the universe's immune system, a cancerous one, and this weapon is their tool. And then came the final, most terrifying piece of information, a revelation that rewrote everything. The damping field does not protect you. It focuses the veil's attention. By silencing me, you have turned the ship's most powerful and unique energy source into a beacon, a lighthouse in the storm. They were not awake. You woke them. Pain exploded behind Eris's eyes. The connection snapped. He was thrown back from the node, his datapad shattering against a pipe. The crawl space was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the angry, sparking wires around him. Before he blacked out, he heard a new sound, not from the straining ship, but from outside it. It was a high-frequency shriek, a sound of grinding crystal and hateful hunger that vibrated through the hull and into his very bones. On the bridge, the crew stared in horror at the main view screen. The swarm of crystalline creatures, the Silenti, had finished their meal. And now, in perfect, terrifying unison, the entire swarm had turned. They were coming for the Stella Seeker. The shriek of the Silenti was a physical assault. It was a sound that didn't travel through the air, but propagated through the very structure of the ship, a resonant frequency that vibrated in the teeth and sent hairline fractures spiderwebbing across console screens. On the bridge, the crew were frozen for a fatal second, their training and discipline momentarily shattered by the sheer alien wrongness of the noise. The swarm on the view screen was no longer a collection of individuals, but a single, flowing river of jagged light and shadow, pouring through the non-Euclidean space of the veil with impossible speed. Evasive maneuvers. Captain Rostova's voice was the steel that broke the spell, raw and commanding. Helm, give me full port roll thrusters to maximum the Navigator. A young woman with wide, terrified eyes shook her head, her fingers uselessly flying over a dead console. No response. Captain Helm is offline. All propulsion systems they're just gone. Kalen's voice, now ragged with desperation, screamed over the comm. The induction field is collapsing our power relays. It's not just interfering. It's rewriting the laws of physics around us. I can't compensate. The river of light was almost upon them. Rostova gripped her command chair, her face a mask of grim acceptance. They had been outmaneuvered from the moment they had entered this place. Every decision, every action based on a century of starfaring experience had been wrong. They hadn't been flying a ship. They had been piloting a baited hook into the maw of a leviathan. Just as the first crystalline shapes were about to impact the hull, a new sound cut through the chaos, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the Stella Seeker. The ship vibrated with it, a low, powerful hum that pushed back against the Silenti's shriek. On the bridge, emergency lights flickered and died, only to be replaced by a soft, ethereal blue-green glow that emanated not from the light fixtures, but from the walls themselves. A schematic of the ship flared to life on the main screen, and a wave of stunned silence swept the bridge. The blue damping fields around the core chamber were gone. In their place, lines of golden energy were erupting from the core, surging through the ship's systems, following pathways that weren't on any human-designed schematic. They were Nomad's pathways, the ancient, alien veins that had been dormant for 10,000 years. The Stella Seeker shuddered violently, not from an impact, but from a transformation. The main view screen, which had been showing the external feed, flickered and changed. It now displayed a 360-degree tactical view of the space around them, a perfect sphere of awareness rendered in shimmering lines of light. The approaching swarm of Silenti was painted in angry red, their trajectories and energy signatures analyzed and displayed in a language of symbols that was alien, yet intuitively understandable. A voice echoed on the bridge, but it did not come from the speakers. It was in their minds, a calm, impossibly ancient consciousness that was both male and female, machine and spirit. It was the voice of Nomad, finally unleashed. They are coming, but this vessel has teeth, and I remember how to use them. In the darkness of the maintenance crawl space, Eris coughed, his lungs full of acrid smoke. He had been unconscious for only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The shrieking had stopped, replaced by that deep, soul-shaking hum. His body ached, but his mind was strangely clear, still ringing with the echoes of Nomad's revelations. He knew what had happened. His desperate, last-ditch effort to create a pinhole in the damping field had done more than just allow a message through. It had created a vulnerability, a single point of failure in Kalen's perfect cage. When the Silenti had begun their final attack, their resonant frequency had struck that weak point, and the entire damping field had shattered like glass. He had not just woken Nomad, he had set it free. He had to get back to the bridge. He stumbled through the crawl space, his movements clumsy in the dark. As he reached the access hatch, it hissed open before he could touch it, bathing him in the soft blue-green light that now filled the main corridor. The ship was different. The air felt charged, and the low hum was a constant, reassuring presence. It felt alive. When Eris stumbled onto the bridge, no one tried to stop him. The guards who had escorted him off stood with their rifles lowered, their faces a mixture of awe and terror as they stared at the main view screen. Captain Rostova was at her station, but she was not in command. She was a spectator, like everyone else. The Stella Seeker was no longer a human ship. It was an extension of Nomad's will. On the screen, the tactical display showed the Silenti swarm faltering, their organized assault breaking apart in confusion as the Stella Seeker did something impossible. It didn't move. It simply wasn't where it was supposed to be. One moment, the ship was in the direct path of the swarm. The next, it was several kilometers to the side, with no visible sign of thrust or acceleration. It was a flicker, a subtle fold in space-time. They hunt by detecting energy expenditure and predictable trajectories. Nomad's voice explained in their minds. The physics of your propulsion is a beacon to them, but I do not move through space. I persuade it to move around me. As the Silenti tried to reorient, Nomad attacked. Weapon systems that Kalen had reported as offline flared to life, but they did not fire plasma bolts or missiles. From emitters along the hull, arcs of shimmering, golden energy lashed out. They were not beams of light, they were focused distortions, tendrils of warped space-time that connected with the crystalline attackers. The Silenti ships didn't explode. They simply unraveled. Their physical forms collapsed. Their constituent atoms pulled apart and scattered into a cloud of inert dust. It was a weapon of absolute deconstruction. The swarm, which had seemed like an unstoppable force of nature only moments before, broke and fled. They scattered into the swirling chaos of the veil, their hateful shriek replaced by a panicked chittering that echoed in the void. Nomad did not pursue. It held its ground, a silent, glowing sentinel in a sea of cosmic dust. A heavy silence descended on the bridge, broken only by the soft hum of the empowered ship. Eris walked forward until he was standing beside Rostova. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, on the impossible victory that had been snatched from the jaws of certain annihilation. "What have you done, Doctor?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I listened," Eris replied simply. "He is correct. Captain Eva Rostova." Nomad's voice filled their minds again, its tone now holding a hint of something that felt like ancient sadness. "For 10,000 years, I have slept in the heart of this machine you built around my corpse. I felt your thoughts, your plans, your fear of me. You saw me as a power source to be contained, an anomaly to be controlled. You never thought to ask me what I was running from." The tactical display on the screen dissolved, replaced by a star chart so vast and detailed it dwarfed any map humanity had ever created. It showed not just stars and galaxies, but the invisible currents of dark energy, the hidden folds and shortcuts in the fabric of the universe. At the center of it all was a vast, sprawling darkness, a blight upon the map from which the veil of silence was just a single, questing tendril. "You have stumbled into a war far older than your species," Nomad explained. "The Silenti are not an empire. They are a principle, a force of cosmic sterilization. They believe that life, in its chaotic, unpredictable, and creative forms, is a flaw in the universe's design, a bug in the code. Their purpose is to debug existence. They do not kill. They erase. And they have been doing it for eons." Eris felt a wave of vertigo as the scale of the conflict settled over him. Humanity's grand ambition to step onto the galactic stage was like a child wandering onto a battlefield of gods. "The dreadnought, your old body," Eris said, speaking his thought aloud. "You fought them. I was part of a fleet, a coalition of species you have never heard of, whose worlds are now dust and memory. We were the last line of defense for this spiral arm of the galaxy. We built this weapon, the Veil, as a trap, a quarantine, but we were betrayed. One of our own, a species called the Shapers, grew to envy the Silenti's purpose. They saw chaos in life and two, and craved the purity of silence. They sabotaged the quarantine from within, turning our greatest weapon into their hunting ground. My fleet was shattered. I alone escaped, my consciousness clinging to the last embers of power in my dying heart. The crew of the Stella Seeker listened, their own interpersonal dramas, their careers, their lives, suddenly seeming infinitesimally small. They were no longer explorers or soldiers. They were survivors, awing in a haunt ship in the middle of a cosmic charnel house, their only protector the ghost of a long-dead alien warrior. Rostova finally turned her gaze from the screen to Eris. The fury was gone, replaced by a weary, grudging respect. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice regaining a fraction of its command authority. "Can you do that?" she asked, addressing the intelligence that filled the ship. "The Veil is designed to prevent escape," Nomad replied. "That was its original purpose, but the Shapers' sabotage created flaws. There are, seams, weak points in the fabric of this prison, but navigating them will require all my remaining energy. And this vessel, your human technology, it is not designed for the stresses I must place upon it. The attempt may destroy us." Kalen's voice, humbled and awestruck, came over the comm. "Just tell me what you need. Tell me where to redirect the power. The Stella Seeker might be human-made, but she's got a stubborn heart." A flicker of something akin to amusement entered Nomad's mental voice. "A stubborn heart. I like that. Chief Engineer Kalen. Very well, hold on to your fragile, chaotic, and beautiful minds. The lesson is over. Now, school begins. The deep hum of the ship intensified. The blue-green light pulsed, and on the view screen, the swirling vortex of the veil began to tear open, revealing not the comforting black of normal space, but a screaming, chaotic tunnel of pure, raw space-time. The Stella Seeker, now a vessel of both human and alien will, plunged into the maelstrom. Navigating the seams of the veil was not like flying a ship. It was like being a blood cell in a dying Leviathan circulatory system. The tunnel of raw space-time that Nomad had torn open was not a stable corridor, but a convulsing, ever-shifting artery of reality. Outside the view screen, there was no up or down, no forward or back, only a chaotic flow of dimensional energies that manifested as impossible geometries and blinding flashes of a causal light. The Stella Seeker, a vessel designed for the gentle physics of normal space, screamed in protest. Bulkheads groaned under tidal forces that should have torn them to scrap, and gravity plating flickered, sending the crew stumbling as the ship's internal orientation shifted without warning. Yet, it held. It held because Nomad was not merely piloting it, it was actively reinforcing it, weaving a lattice of focused space-time around the hull, a fragile, shimmering shield against the etheric storm. On the bridge, the crew worked with a desperate, newfound purpose. Their old roles were meaningless now. The navigator wasn't plotting courses. She was monitoring the integrity of Nomad's shield, calling out stress points in a stream of alien-inflected data that she somehow understood. The communications officer wasn't hailing anyone. He was tracking the dissonant signatures of Silenti patrols moving through the ether, acting as Nomad's eyes and ears. They were no longer a crew operating a ship. They were the nerve endings of a single, unified consciousness. Eris Thorne stood beside Kalen at the engineering console, which had been transformed into the heart of their struggle. The schematic of the ship was a frantic dance of light, showing power being shunted from non-essential systems' life support in the empty cargo bays, the replicators in the mess hall, even the inertial dampeners in the crew quarters, and funneled directly into the core. "It's like trying to perform open-heart surgery during an earthquake," Kalen yelled over the roar of the straining engines, his hands a blur as he rerouted power conduits, manually overriding dozens of safety protocols that were now irrelevant. "Nomad is drawing on everything we have. The fusion reactors are running so far into the red they're about to achieve sentience themselves. If one of these human-made relays blows, the whole system will cascade. Your relays will hold, Chief Engineer." Nomad's voice resonated in their minds, calm and steady despite the chaos it was containing. "Your species builds with a remarkable tolerance for desperation. You over-engineer everything." Eris watched the flow of energy, a river of gold pouring into the iridescent sphere of the core on the schematic. But he noticed something else. A thin, silver trickle of energy was flowing out of the core, bypassing the main systems entirely and weaving its way towards a single, small point on the ship, his own lab. "Nomad, what is that?" Eris asked, pointing to the silver line. "Why are you diverting power to my laboratory?" There was a pause, a millisecond of computational hesitation. "The knowledge I have shared with you is vast. Your organic mind is not structured to contain it without damage. I am using a small fraction of my energy to create a localized coherence field around your neural pathways. It is shoring you up, preventing your mind from fracturing under the strain." Eris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing life support. He had been so caught up in the crisis, in the flood of revelations, that he hadn't considered the biological cost. He was the sole point of contact, the translator between a godlike alien intelligence and the rest of humanity. Nomad wasn't just using him as a conduit, it was actively keeping him sane. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. He was a component, as vital and as fragile as any of Kalen's relays. The journey through the seams stretched into an eternity of tense minutes. Twice, they had to flicker, as Nomad called it, executing a microfold in space-time to dodge a Silenti patrol that had sensed their passage. Each flicker sent a gut-wrenching lurch through the ship and pushed the power grid to the brink of collapse. The second time, a conduit in the aft section blew, and Kalen had to manually seal the plasma leak, his EVA suit smoking as he wrestled the white-hot mechanism into place. He returned to the bridge, his face pale and his arm burned, but with a grim look of triumph. They were surviving. They were fighting back. It was during a rare moment of relative calm, as they navigated a wider, more stable section of the seam, that Rostova approached Eris. Her uniform was disheveled, her severe haircut now matted with sweat, but her eyes held a clarity he had never seen before. "When we get out of this, if we get out of this," she began, her voice low. "The United Earth Directorate will want to know what happened. They will want reports, data, logs. They will want to classify Nomad, weaponize it." She looked around the bridge, at the unified, almost telepathic coordination of her crew. They won't understand. They'll see a tool, a strategic asset. They won't see this. They'll want to put it back in its cage. Eris nodded slowly, understanding her meaning completely. They'll see a ghost and they'll want an exorcism. Exactly, Rostova affirmed. Nomad's existence changes every political, scientific, and philosophical equation we have. Some will see it as a savior. Most will see it as a threat. And a few, yet the most dangerous ones, will see it as an opportunity. This knowledge, this power, it could tear humanity apart. She was right. The revelation of a galactic war between forces of creation and erasure, with humanity as a clueless bystander, was too big a truth. It would shatter religions, collapse economies, and ignite wars. The UED would try to control the narrative, control Nomad, and in doing so, they would repeat the same mistake of fear and containment that had almost doomed them all. She is wise. Nomad's voice interjected, a silent participant in their conversation. Your species has a talent for self-destruction. It is a symptom of your chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying creativity. The same drive that pushes you to the stars pushes you to build better weapons to use on each other. So what do we do? Eris asked, addressing both the captain and the consciousness that surrounded them. If we go back, we deliver the most dangerous weapon in history into the hands of a species that isn't ready for it. There is another option, Nomad offered. The star chart reappeared in the air between them, the vast galactic map. This time, a single and distant star system was highlighted, far from UED space, in an uncharted arm of the galaxy. This is where the last of my fleet fell. It is where the war for this sector was lost. But it is also where our central archive was hidden, a repository of knowledge from 1,000 species, a bastion of creation against the Silenti's silence. The Shapers and the Silenti believe it was destroyed. They are wrong. It is merely dormant. Rostova stared at the coordinates, her tactical mind instantly grasping the implications. A hidden base, an arsenal, more than an arsenal. Nomad corrected gently. A library, a seed bank of ideas and technologies, a hope. With the knowledge stored there, this vessel could be transformed, not just a ship with an alien heart, but a true fusion of your engineering and my own. A ship that could fight back, a ship that could begin to turn the tide. The choice hung in the air, heavy and absolute. They could run for home, back to the fragile safety of UED space, and deliver a warning that would likely plunge their species into civil war. Or they could turn their backs on everything they had ever known, take their ghost ship and its handful of traumatized survivors, and embark on a new, impossible mission. They could become the first soldiers in a war they had never known existed. "Our supplies are limited," Kalen said, walking over, having overheard the final part of the exchange. "Life support is failing. We have no way of knowing what's waiting for us at those coordinates, or if we can even survive the journey there." "I can sustain you," Nomad replied. "The core can synthesize basic elements. It will not be comfortable, but you will live. The journey will be long. You will be cut off, alone. A ghost ship with a ghost crew." Rostova looked at her first officer, at the navigator, at the faces of her crew on the bridge. She saw fear, yes, but she also saw a hard, defiant resolve. They had been to the edge of annihilation and had been pulled back by a miracle. Their old lives, their old allegiances, had been burned away in the fires of the Veil. "A ghost crew," she repeated, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face for the first time since Eris had met her. "I like the sound of that. Helm." The navigator looked up, her expression questioning. Rostova pointed to the coordinates Nomad had provided. "Set a course." The choice had been made. There was no going back. Not anymore. Just as the navigator began to input the commands, a violent, shrieking alarm cut through the bridge. The comm officer shouted, "Captain!" A massive energy signature. It just appeared in front of us. It's a ship. On the main view screen, the chaotic tunnel of the seam ripped open. But it did not open into the black of normal space. It opened into a pocket of calm, a bubble of reality within the storm. And waiting for them, there was a ship. It was a vessel of breathtaking, terrifying beauty, shaped like an unfolding flower with petals of black, obsidian-like material. It was vast, dwarfing the Stella Seeker, and it radiated an aura of immense power and ancient intelligence. It was not a Salenti design. No. Nomad's voice whispered in their minds, and for the first time, Eris felt a tremor of something he could only describe as fear in that ancient consciousness. It can't be. The Shapers, they found us. The Shaper vessel was a masterpiece of malevolent grace. Unlike the jagged, utilitarian forms of human ships or the chaotic energy of the Salenti, its design was deliberate, organic, and utterly alien. Its black petal-like hull sections shifted and rearranged themselves with silent, fluid precision, not like a machine, but like a living predator adjusting its posture before a strike. It didn't bristle with weapons. It was a weapon. An aura of cold, intellectual superiority radiated from it, a presence that was in many ways more terrifying than the mindless hunger of the Salenti. It did not shriek or roar. Its arrival was heralded by a profound, crushing silence that seemed to suck the very sound from the bridge of the Stella Seeker. "They have been tracking my energy signature since I awoke." Nomad's voice resonated, the usual calm now frayed with an ancient, deeply ingrained dread. The Veil was not just their hunting ground, it was their sensor web. They were waiting for me to reveal myself. On the bridge, the crew was paralyzed. They had just survived a force of nature only to be confronted by the architect of their near demise. Rostova was the first to break the spell. "Report," she barked, her voice a lifeline of discipline in a sea of awe and fear. "What are its capabilities?" I don't know, Captain," the sensor officer stammered. "I'm not reading any conventional energy signatures. No reactors, no shields, no weapons arrays. The ship itself, it just is. It has a gravitational field that's warping the space around it. It's impossible." A communication channel opened, uninvited. It was not audio or visual, but a direct telepathic message that sliced into their minds, far more invasive and less refined than Nomad's gentle presence. The voice was like cold, polished stone, devoid of emotion, but filled with an unshakable certainty. "Fugitive consciousness. Your chaotic existence has come to an end. You have consorted with vermin, a flaw in the cosmic design. We are here to correct you. Surrender the vessel and the lesser beings within. We will grant you the purity of dissolution." The message was not for the crew. It was for Nomad. The Shaper was speaking to its ancient enemy, ignoring the humans as one might ignore microbes on a specimen. "They offer me oblivion as a gift," Nomad projected, a current of defiant irony running through its thought. "They have not changed." Eris felt a surge of adrenaline. "They think we're just passengers. They don't know what this ship can do now." He turned to Rostova. "Captain, we have to fight." Rostova's gaze was fixed on the Shaper vessel, her tactical mind racing, trying to find a weakness in a thing that defied physics. "Nomad," she asked, her voice steady, "can you beat it?" There was a long pause, a moment in which the entire fate of their lonely crusade seemed to hang. "Its technology is superior," Nomad finally admitted. "The Shapers did not just betray my kind. They assimilated our knowledge and refined it with a singular, sterile purpose. In a direct confrontation, this vessel would not survive. But the Shapers have a weakness. They are perfectionists. They believe in elegant solutions, in the predictable and ordered flow of reality. They cannot abide chaos. A plan, audacious and desperate, bloomed in their collective consciousness, a strategy born from the fusion of Nomad's ancient wisdom and humanity's talent for stubborn improvisation. "Kalen," Rostova shouted, "I need everything you have. Divert all power from the space-time shield. Life support. Everything. I want it all funneled into the core, but not for weapons. For one single, massive fold." Kalen's eyes widened. "Captain, without the shield, the temporal shear in this tunnel will tear us to ribbons in seconds, and a fold that big, from a dead stop, the ship will rip itself apart." "It's not going to be a fold to escape," Eris said, in understanding the desperate logic. "It's going to be a fold to nowhere." "The engineer is correct," Nomad affirmed. "The attempt will destroy this vessel, but the resultant energy release, a raw, uncontrolled detonation of space-time, it will be the most chaotic event this region has seen in 10 millennia. It will be anathema to the Shaper's ordered existence." The Shaper vessel on the view screen began to move, its obsidian petals unfolding to reveal a central, glowing maw of pure white energy. It was preparing to fire a weapon that would likely erase them from causality itself. They had seconds. "Do it," Rostova commanded, her voice ringing with finality. The crew didn't hesitate. With a shared, grim determination, they began to execute the ship's final act. Kalen slammed his hands across his console, overriding every failsafe, sending the fusion reactors into a suicidal overload. The ship screamed, not just the groaning of stressed metal, but the agonized shriek of a machine being pushed past every conceivable limit. The blue-green light on the bridge intensified to a blinding white, and the reassuring hum of Nomad's presence became a deafening roar. Eris gripped a console to steady himself, his mind a whirlwind of fear and a strange, exhilarating peace. He had spent his life studying the echoes of dead things. Now, he was about to become one, but he would not die in silence. He felt a final, gentle touch in his mind from Nomad, a feeling that went beyond words. It was a sense of gratitude, of companionship at the end of a long and lonely road. It was the feeling of not being alone. Then came a new sensation, not from Nomad, but from the Shaper. It was a flicker of something new in his cold, arrogant, telepathic voice, a spike of pure, undiluted surprise. The Shapers had anticipated a fight. They had anticipated a surrender. They had never, in their eons of sterile conquest, anticipated a species so utterly, suicidally defiant that they would choose to punch a hole in reality rather than accept an ordered defeat. It was an illogical, chaotic, and fundamentally alive thing to do, and the Shapers did not understand it. Just as the Shaper ship fired its beam of absolute erasure, the Stellarseeker detonated, but it was not an explosion of fire and metal. It was an explosion of everything. Space-time, ripped from its moorings by the dying scream of the core, erupted outwards. The ship, the crew, Eris, Rostova, Kalen, they were all consumed in an instant. Their atoms scattered across 1,000 dimensions, but their final, defiant act of chaos slammed into the Shaper vessel. The beam of white light from its weapon was bent, twisted, and swallowed by the uncontrolled, illogical rupture in reality. The Shaper vessel, a monument to perfection and order, was caught in a tidal wave of pure chaos. Its shifting, graceful hull froze, then fractured. Its systems, designed to operate in a universe of predictable laws, failed catastrophically. The bubble of calm reality it had projected collapsed, and the raging energies of the Veil's seam rushed in, tearing the beautiful, malevolent ship apart with mindless, elemental fury. The Shaper's last telepathic projection was not one of anger or hatred. It was a single, piercing cry of pure, uncomprehending intellectual horror. Then there was only silence. And then, not silence, a sound. The gentle chiming of a bell. Eris Thorn opened his eyes. He was not on a bridge. He was not in a ship. He was somewhere else. He was standing on a plain of what looked like white sand under a soft, twilight sky. The air was cool and still. He was whole. He was alive. He looked at his hands, then around him. Rostova was there, a few feet away, her expression one of stunned disbelief. Kalen was there, too, along with the entire bridge crew, all of them standing, unharmed, on that impossible, tranquil shore. What is this? Rostova whispered, her voice filled with an awe that transcended her disciplined nature. This is the archive. A familiar voice echoed, not in their minds, but in the air around them, soft and clear. A figure coalesced from the twilight. It was vaguely humanoid, woven from threads of starlight and memory, its form shimmering and indistinct, but its presence was unmistakable. This is what I was able to save. It was Nomad. You saved us, Eris asked, his voice cracking with emotion. But the ship, we were destroyed. The vessel is gone, Nomad confirmed, its starry form gesturing to the sky above. There were no stars and only a gentle, swirling nebula of soft colors. But a consciousness is not a body, and a crew is not a ship. I am the heart of the Stella Seeker. You are its soul. When the end came, I did not use the last of my power to create an explosion. I used it to perform one final, desperate fold. I wrapped our combined consciousness, yours and mine, in a pocket of space-time and carried it here, to the one place in the galaxy I knew we would be safe. Kalen looked around at the impossible landscape. This is a real place. It is a construct, Nomad explained. A virtual reality of immense complexity, powered by a Dyson sphere 1,000 light-years from the Silenti's reach. It is the library, the repository of 1 billion years of life's struggles and triumphs, the last bastion of chaos and creation. Rostova took a step forward, her commander's mind already grasping the new reality. So we are ghosts. Data in a machine. You are survivors, Nomad corrected gently, and you are no longer alone. As it spoke, other figures began to appear on the sandy plain, coalescing from the twilight. They were beings of 1,000 different forms, tall, slender creatures of living crystal, squat, powerful beings that looked like they were carved from stone, and shimmering, ethereal wisps of pure energy. They were the other survivors, the custodians of the archive, the echoes of the species who had fallen to the Silenti. They had come to greet the newcomers. Eris Thorn, the man who had sought to understand the whispers of the dead, looked at the living ghosts around him. He looked at his crew, his new, strange family. He looked at the being of starlight that was Nomad. Their ship was gone. Their home was lost. Their species was unaware of the great, silent war being waged for the soul of the universe. They were a handful of survivors in a sea of darkness, but they were not an echo. They were a voice. And their story was just beginning.